Hey, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you're well and welcome back to another player review where every single person that moves club to club via trade or free agency this 2023 off-season, I'm going to review them, tell you what it means for the club they're departing, the club they've arrived to, and ultimately what it means for us as SuperCoach and AFL fantasy players in 2024 and beyond. There are some players that are going to move clubs this off-season that for SuperCoach and AFL Fantasy, I could do a 10-second video and say, don't worry about it, they're not relevant, jog on, and save you some watching time. And then there are some others that I'd love to spend 30 minutes on. And Todd Goldstein is one of those guys, but I'm not going to spend that long. I'll give you my fantasy and SuperCoach take on Todd in just a moment. But let's look at what it means for North Melbourne. Him leaving very simply does this. It puts Tristan Xerri as the obvious and really only ruck candidate in this team. He is now the number one. Many would say he was already the number one ruck option before he went down with a pretty serious injury this year, and I probably wouldn't disagree with that, to be fair. But Xerri is now the clear and number one guy. This is where some fantasy relevance comes of a player departing, because Xerri becomes a guy that can be really, really relevant. We've talked about this in other players throughout this series. Matthew Flynn comes to mind where, look, it's nice for draft, but not for classic. But for Xerri, this opens up a great opportunity for him to hold down the number one spot and for his SuperCoach and AFL fantasy relevance to really skyrocket. So I think this is a nice move for Todd Goldstein, but I think for North Melbourne, it's an even better move for Tristan Xerri. I really like who he is as a player. I like what he is as a fantasy prospect. And so while we haven't even talked about Todd's fantasy output, put Tristan Xerri as a value option for us in your starting squads. Now, not everyone might not want to go some value through there in at R2, but Xerri is absolutely someone you can seriously consider as a value ruck option. It's good for them. For North Melbourne, they're just going to keep adding some depth around him. They've already got plenty of talls. It wouldn't surprise me if they go and draft some more, given this is a draft that is upcoming. It's a much heavier key position and talls draft. Next year's more midfield heavy. To be frank, North don't really need any more midfielders, so they're fine in that area of the ground. Let's talk about what it means for Essendon. It means this really simply, that the Sam Draper injury is incredibly serious. He's gone in for off-season surgery on his groin, and the club is saying at earliest, he'll be back to some form of training in January. I know that feels like a long time away now when we're talking in the early parts of October, but that's a real big chunk of the off-season out of the way and really only gives him about 6-7 weeks before the pre-season matches get underway. So he is under some serious doubt, Sam Draper, to play early in the year. As a result, Todd Goldstein's going to play a lot of fantasy footy and a lot of footy for the Essendon Footy Club early in the year. So is he going to be clear number one ruck early? Yeah, I think he is. What was evidenced last year, and maybe it was just an interesting parallel, is Essendon probably looked at their best when Draper and Phillips were co-sharing that ruck role. And then sometimes we see Phillips get subbed out. Sometimes we would play some additional support as a tall forward and play a 50-50 role. It wouldn't shock me to see Draper and Goldstein, when Draper does build back up to some full fitness, to see them play a shared ruck role. It seems to be that that's what the coaching staff are quite comfortable with doing. So I think Goldie's going to get plenty of early games, and that's good news for us as fantasy coaches, whether it be classic or draft. That's really good news for us, and hopefully Draper returns healthily, but that they don't rush him. He clearly is their long-term prospect, and Goldstein, he's not coming there just to build some time through the VFL. He's coming for an opportunity to play finals, and he's coming for an opportunity to play. And I think Essendon and he are both hoping that those things happen in 2024. What does it mean for AFL Fantasy and for SuperCoach? Great question. Well, he averaged in the 90s this year in SuperCoach and through the 70s in AFL Fantasy. So it's not crazy value. But I think there's still enough fat on the bone that depending on the way you like to play these games, he could be a really viable play for us. There is some value there with Todd Goldstein, and there are a lot of ruck combinations that we can really get excited about. Last year, it was pretty much Marshall and English, and any other combination you tried for big chunks of the year wasn't really that successful. Whereas we can build an incredible strategy conversation for this coming off-season that will see great diversity in the rucks, and Todd Goldstein is a really fascinating one. We know he's got the history of big 100 averages across the formats. SuperCoach has always been his more preferable scoring format, but he's shown multiple times, even not just going back half a decade or a full decade, but even as recently as just a couple of years ago, that Todd Goldstein can score well at that number one ruck spot. And so for me, I think that he's a guy to at least consider in classic drafts. It's obvious. You have full handcuff strategy with him here. You get him, you get Draper. You know, Brian is going to be there as the third stringer, that if they need it, he'll come through with the goods. But you handcuff those two boys together on draft day, and you're away, and your ruck stocks are sorted. Now, all of this sounds fantastic, doesn't it? But there's one really important ingredient that I failed to mention. I think there's a chance that Todd Goldstein picks up ruck forward dual position status this season. At the back of the year, when he and Tristan Cherry at North Melbourne were sharing that ruck role, it was Goldstein that was spending the majority of time as the forward and then relief ruck opportunities, and Tristan was playing the lead ruck role. I think there probably is enough data. I think there's enough that he's a live chance. I'm not certain of it, but I think he's a real live chance to pick up ruck forward DPP. That only just further should move him up your draft board, but also further elevate him in your considerations for Classic. Not just because he's a proven ruckman that can score tons, relatively easy. Now we'll wait to see what his fixture holds. That's an important piece of the puzzle to know how much he goes from a watch list to a high consideration to someone you should really put in your starting squad. We've got months to figure that out. But these elements are all starting to build together. Should be number one ruck, might have DPP, and if he's got a favourable ruck fixture early, it could be awesome. Not just in the rucks, but also through the forward lines. We are losing the vast majority of our top line forwards from the 2023 season through to either the midfield or the defensive eligible roles. So to me, Todd Goldstein is an absolute watch list for your 2024 fantasy footy season. DPP or not, Todd Goldstein is someone, even in Classic, across all formats, I'm going to seriously keep a watch list and consideration on in 2024. Do you agree or you disagree? You can comment below and let me know what you think about Todd Goldstein and his fantasy potential now as an Essendon Bomber. If you haven't watched the other player reviews that I have done on this channel, you can go back and check it out. Every single player that's been reviewed from the off-season that's moving in free agency and trade, we're reviewing them here on YouTube. Just need to turn on the notifications, subscribe. You can go and check out every single player movement that we have done so far. We'll cover every single player. If you haven't subscribed to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your Coaches Panel podcast, make sure you do that. Check out the articles that land pretty regularly in season and in the pre-season at coachespanel.tv. And of course, we would appreciate your support by joining us as part of the Patreon fan group. You can find all the details to become a Patreon for just a couple of dollars a month. You can find that in the description of this episode. It is all there, and for just a couple of bucks a month, you support the Coaches Panel and get some really sweet exclusive bonus content. I'll be back for you soon with another player review of someone that's moved clubs this off-season.